Imagine a man who, in the eyes of the world, possessed everything: wisdom beyond human comprehension, riches that could make entire nations pale in comparison, and a power so vast that he reigned in peace over a glorious empire. This was Solomon, the wisest king in history, whose temple in Jerusalem gleamed with gold and precious stones, an architectural marvel that defied imagination. But behind all this splendor, a dark enigma unfolded. How could a heart so blessed become fertile ground for darkness? The echo of Solomon's own words resounds in his late-life reflections, a profound lament about the vanity of everything he pursued. In Ecclesiastes, we hear the voice of a king who, at the end of his journey, questioned the meaning of all his earthly glory, realizing that without faithfulness to God, everything is vanity of vanities. What hidden legacy do the royal chronicles fail to tell about the passions that, like a subtle poison, corroded the heart of the wisest king? Just as the foundations of a colossal temple can be shaken by unseen internal cracks, Solomon's life reveals the fractures in a faith not fully grounded. He built a temple for God, but his own life became a cracked temple, divided between the divine wisdom he was given and the human choices that led him astray. Let us now dive into the chasm between divine wisdom and human choices to uncover the true story of the divided monarch. Most people make a critical mistake when thinking about Solomon's wisdom. It was not a shield against temptation, but a privilege that demanded greater vigilance. God granted him unprecedented intelligence and discernment so he could rule with justice and distinguish between good and evil. But the hidden flaw in the divine plan for a king had been warned about long before. In Deuteronomy 17:16-17, God instructed that the king should not multiply horses, silver, or women for himself, so that his heart would not turn away. Solomon, through gradual disobedience, ignored these divine warnings, and the wisdom that was meant to be his guide became a path to deviation. The dissonance between blessing and disobedience is shocking. Solomon's early wisdom, evident in his judgments and the building of the temple, collided with growing idolatry. He who, by divine gift, spoke with God and understood the mysteries of creation, allowed his intellect to become detached from the divine will, yielding to worldly pleasures that distanced him from God's commandments. Here is a simple test to know whether your wisdom is true. If it distances you from divine principles in pursuit of worldly pleasures, it is corrupted. Solomon's wealth and knowledge, instead of strengthening his faith, became a poisoned banquet. Surrounded by splendor, his spiritual emptiness deepened as he drifted away from the Lord. The fatal mistake many make without realizing is confusing tolerance with spiritual complicity. In his pursuit of political alliances and perhaps an unchecked desire, Solomon took for himself 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines from foreign nations, many of whom did not worship God. This was not merely a moral issue, but a dangerous breach through which idolatry infiltrated the heart of the kingdom. The Bible is explicit. God warned the children of Israel not to marry women from other nations, for they would turn their hearts toward other gods. This multiplication of wives was the surprising factor that sabotaged Solomon's mission. His love for these foreign women corrupted his worship, leading him to build high places and altars for pagan gods like Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and Molech, detestable in the eyes of the Lord. The temple he had built for the one true God was, in essence, profaned by the proliferation of pagan shrines in Jerusalem. Subtle signs that your faith is misaligned when personal compromises begin to undermine your deepest spiritual convictions. The leaking ship analogy fits perfectly. Small concessions, one by one, opened great holes in Solomon's faith. leading to a nearly imperceptible spiritual shipwreck. The grandeur of his beginning gave way to a silent but devastating decline. Myths about biblical prosperity often fail to recognize that Solomon's wealth alone did not ensure his spiritual integrity. On the contrary, his material abundance, with gold, silver, and spices flowing into his kingdom in unimaginable proportions. 1 Kings 10:23-25 revealed that prosperity without purpose is vanity and can become a trap. He became the richest king on earth, surpassing all other monarchs of his time. The shocking consequence of greed, disguised as abundance, was that the accumulation of gold and silver diverted his heart from dependence on God. Instead of using his wealth to glorify the Lord and bless his people, he indulged in a lifestyle of opulence and self-satisfaction. Why do most people fail to grasp the danger of unrestrained wealth? The subtle temptation is to trust in material provision rather than divine providence, a mistake Solomon made in overwhelming fashion. The silent factor that sabotates faith is the subtle idolatry of comfort and status, which pulls man away from his true spiritual pursuit. The golden desert metaphor illustrates this perfectly. A landscape of immense riches, but devoid of the living water of genuine faith. Solomon experienced material fullness, yet at the end of his life, he proclaimed in Ecclesiastes that all was vanity and chasing the wind, an existential void that not all the gold in the world could fill. The unexpected side of Solomon's greatness is that, despite his wisdom, his kingdom was also marked by forced labor and heavy taxation. To fund the construction of the Grand Temple, his palace, and other projects, he imposed taxes and conscripted thousands of Israelites into compulsory labor. 1 Kings 5:13-18, 1 Kings 12:4. This reveals the hidden failure in managing an empire without a just heart. The glory of building the temple, an act of devotion to God, paradoxically coexisted with the oppression of his own people. A practical exercise to evaluate your use of power is to reflect on how authority, even with good intentions, can lead to tyranny, if not tempered by justice and compassion. Solomon, who was supposed to be a shepherd to Israel, began to act like a pharaoh, using his power for personal ends and to maintain his opulence. Why is excessive control a problem for a spiritual leader? The attempt to control outcomes rather than trust in divine sovereignty leads to exploitation and alienation from God. The Pharaoh on David's throne analogy is powerful. The shadow of Egyptian oppression manifested in the practices of a king of Israel, who in turn became an oppressor of his own people. This pursuit of human control, instead of depending on divine justice and provision, planted the seeds of division and rebellion in his kingdom. The secret to maintaining divine coherence is continuous obedience, even amidst blessings and success. Solomon's story is a warning about gradual downfall. Small deviations, such as his profane alliances and pursuit of wealth and control, led to total apostasy. 1 Kings 11:9-10 describes how God became angry with Solomon because his heart turned away from the Lord, who had appeared to him twice. The hidden error that led to the division of the kingdom was God's wrath against Solomon's disobedience. God's promises to David were conditional upon the obedience of his descendants. Solomon's unfaithfulness resulted in most of the kingdom being stripped from his heirs, leaving only one tribe for the sake of David and Jerusalem. 1 Kings 11:11-13. The once unified and glorious kingdom was torn apart, a visible testimony of his divided heart. A mental model to transmute anxiety into divine intention is understanding that trust in God is the only guarantee of a lasting legacy. The withered root tree metaphor applies to Solomon. His actions, though promising at first, dried up the root of his faith, leading to the ruin of his kingdom after his death. Solomon's legacy is thus a paradox, a king of immense wisdom and glory, whose disobedience brought about Israel's division and decline. The wise king's last breath remains a mystery. Whether Solomon ever truly repented is not clearly described in the Bible, as it is with other kings. Ecclesiastes, however, stands as his final reflection, a work that questions the vanity of all he pursued and points to the importance of fearing God and keeping his commandments. The deep echo of divine admonition resonates through the ages, the importance of remaining faithful to God's principles regardless of greatness or power. Solomon's story serves as a timeless warning for all generations about the dangers of spiritual complacency and idolatry. The timeless lesson of a divided heart is clear. Even the wisest of men, graced with divine gifts, can fall if his heart is not fully given to God. Solomon is the lighthouse that went dark. The light of his wisdom and power, meant to guide Israel, was dimmed by his own darkness and worldly choices. His story, though tragic in its ending, still warns us of the dangers of pride and idolatry and calls us to seek an unshakable faith in God. May Solomon's story serve as a mirror, reflecting the perils of duality and the eternal truth that true wisdom lies in a heart wholly devoted to the Lord.